One of the areas in EMDR and PTSD and trauma therapy that I'll continue to speak about always because it's such an underlying theme of dealing with trauma. It continues to not surprise me anymore, but definitely fascinate me. And that's the area of what we as EMDR therapists call the negative cognition. Take that apart, the negative thought, the negative belief, the negative idea. And while it doesn't surprise me anymore, like I said, it continues to amaze me in the fact that when we are helping somebody reprocess a traumatic memory, which is in its essence what EMDR is for, treating maladaptively or unprocessed memories. And there's a different couple of ways that those can manifest. It's not just something you see all the time. But there's different ways to manifest. But in this negative cognition, when we're helping you process these memories, we're going to ask you a series of questions. And these questions are to reactivate the memory. When I first started EMDR therapy and I was new and still learning all the basics and the advanced skills, I always thought that asking these specific 8 questions was gaining information. And while I do get some information from it, the reality is we're reactivating the trauma. We're doing that in a way of both cognition and emotion. I'll save that for another video. What I want to get back to is the negative cognition. And the negative cognition is that belief about yourself, other people, the world, safety, control, power, responsibility. And it never fails that when somebody has a maladaptively or unprocessed memory, there is some type of negative cognition that is involved. Whether it be about responsibility, something you've done, power, you're powerless, safety, I can never trust anyone, I can never be safe. Most of them, and I'll say this for myself, but I have a feeling that most EMDR therapists will find this as well and also agree, but for myself, I hear a lot of responsibility. I should have been there faster. We should have worked harder. I'm not good enough. I'm a terrible person. I'm a horrible father. But especially when it comes to things like public safety and military trauma, a lot of responsibility on self, that if you ask them this before reactivating the memory, either they didn't know this or they're definitely trying to hide this. It's a lot of responsibility. A lot of people will say, I'm not good enough, I'm terrible, we should have been there fast enough, we should have done more. And the technical and tactical reality of that is not true. In fact, you can question them about whether they did enough, whether they felt like they did everything they could with the terrible situation they had. And a vast majority of them will tell you, yes, we did this, I wish we could have done this part better or known more about this, but with what we had, we did absolutely the best we could. And they've truly convinced themselves of that in a lot of those situations. But they don't feel that way. And in this reactivating, in these questions that reactivate this memory to get it started so we can process it, don't do it on your own. Within this reactivation, one of the questions we'll ask after we get some things like some images and the target itself, what negative thing does this mean about you? And every now and then we have to fish just a little bit or ask some clarifying questions. But you might be amazed, the EMDR therapists listening, if they do listen, won't be amazed by this. But you might be amazed to know that the vast majority of time, even if they didn't believe it, they immediately feel like it's their fault or some type of personal responsibility, some type of safety, some type of lack of control. There's a couple of different categories that we will specifically look at this in. Maybe I'll break them up for later, but this negative cognition, and you can see it when they say it, it cuts them right down to the soul. 10 minutes before I asked those questions, reactivated that memory for them, they would have said, you know, I truly believe we did the best we could. How do you feel about that? I feel like we screwed everything up. And we're not talking about going back and tactically splitting this up. We're not talking about going back and doing a tactical debriefing and seeing if there's things maybe that could have gone better. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. Sometimes you're You're fed an absolute shit sandwich in public safety, and you have to figure out what to do with it. One bite at a time, I guess. But they absolutely, when reactivated, will feel responsible, unsafe, unprotected, out of control. And I'll tell you, I don't know what all the literature says about it, but that negative cognition, in my opinion, as a very experienced and highly trained EMDR therapist, that negative cognition is the problem. Why else do some traumas stick and some don't? Now, there are some easy answers out there. If you have a small child at home and it was a small child you responded to, if it was a friend, or this person got hurt or killed doing something that you normally do, there's absolutely some reasons where you might connect some of your own life story to this. But we've kind of stopped predicting what traumas will stick. Some are grosser than others, some are harder than others, some that involve true victims, truly innocent victims, might be harder to process or might be sticking around. But I'm telling you, it's that negative cognition, that lack of safety, that feeling of absolute responsibility for what happened, that absolute lack of control, that's what's making that stuff stick around. And when we do things like EMDR therapy, and that stuff starts to go away, and I see it every single day. I saw it in my office today. Now, these videos come out a couple of weeks after I make them, so nobody has to worry about any kind of confidentiality. But I saw it in my office even today. This person was able to describe this incident, get it reactivated, and I said, what does this mean about you? And the strong individual said, I feel not good enough. There was absolutely nothing technical this person could have done differently, and they actually know that. But they felt not good enough. And that made them feel like they didn't do enough, when the reality is they absolutely did. It was a horrible situation. And 20 minutes later, that individual left my office with such a low level of disturbance. His chest stopped hurting, his neck wasn't hurting, his heart wasn't racing. He saw the incident differently. We're not changing the incident or the image purposefully itself. We're not trying to cause amnesia. I'd be rich if we could, probably. We're not trying to change it. The incident is real. We're not trying to convince your brain that it didn't happen. But one of my favorite things that happens in EMDR therapy is when an individual has been stuck with this trauma for so long, this horrible visual, this terrible thing. And at the end, I say, what do you see? And they either can't see it anymore, it's difficult to see, it doesn't cause the same emotion. It's still there, it's still real. One of my very good friends along the way, who's actually given me permission to use his name and story, but I'll save that for maybe an interview with him. He said, it feels like you took the story and you put a Snapchat filter over it. And if you've never done anything like EMDR therapy or unfamiliar with neuroscience and how the brain works, that might sound goofy. I don't know. That might sound impossible. I would have thought it was impossible 10 years ago. But when that overreaction, when that over-emotion is no longer reactivated, then you can deal with that memory and it not cause those symptoms in the rest of your life, the anger, the anxiety, the depression, the guilt, the lack of any kind of interest in life, hating your job, hating people around you. Sometimes that comes with experiences in life, but sometimes that comes because you're stuck. What's your negative cognition? What's your negative belief about yourself, other people in the world that's got you stuck?